All right, back again, lesson 3, economics, Mr. Lytle. This one's going to be about government spending. We've seen a lot of that lately, especially during the pandemic. You got stimulus checks to your parents. Most of you, if you're dependent on your parents, they got $500 for you. And they're talking about a second stimulus check and as many as unemployment, things like that. But really and truly, we talked about taxes in lesson 2. And now we're going to talk about what and where your money goes, what it's spent on, as far as the taxes that you give. So let's just jump right in and see where that goes. Share my screen with you again. All right, so where does your money go? And really and truly, there's lots of different things that the government spends on: state government, local government, federal government. All of them use your money and they spend it on something. Now, there are laws that say what they can spend money on or what they have to spend some money on. And then there's also ways that they can basically, to their discretion, use that money for whatever they think that they need, as long as it, like we talked about in the last lesson, as long as it um, is to promote the welfare of the country or the defense of the country. So we'll look first at where does the money come from, right? Where does the federal government get its revenues from? And if you look right here, individual income taxes, that's you guys when you get a job and you pay your income tax. 48% of the revenue that the United States gets money from comes from income taxes of individuals. If you look, the second largest is going to be payroll taxes. That's the taxes that the employees pay on you if you work there. And then we'll go down the line and it gets pretty small there. Corporate business taxes make up about 9%. If you're on corporation, we've talked about that in the class when we were at school. The corporations, what they are, and that income tax, they pay a tax as well, makes up 9%. And then 6% comes from any other. That's about $186 billion, a lot. And then excise taxes or sin taxes, luxury taxes we talked about, comes to 2%. That's where the money comes from that the government spends. So most of it comes from you guys and your parents and your grandparents. And if you work and you pay an income tax, that's where it's going to come from. So let's look at where does it go? All right, so if we're talking about federal spending, what do they spend your money on? And just a quick look, and then we're going to break it down after that. Most of it, as you see, and this is from probably a couple years ago, just give you a look at what it is. The 2019-2020 hasn't come out yet. Now, the budget was passed, but as far as spending and revenue numbers that are come total, it'll be probably next year before they give you that chart. So 22% on healthcare, that's your Medicare, Medicaid, all that kind of stuff, and 20% on national defense, and 20% on Social Security. Those are your big three. And that's what, and you'll see in a minute, some of those is what the government has to spend money on. And then you start looking down as it gets smaller, they budget a safety net, extra money, whatever, 13%. And then the interest that they're paying on the debt that the United States owes. And we've talked about that in class, we've looked it up. Large debt, trillions of dollars the United States owes, and they pay the interest of that debt through your taxes as well. Federal retirees, veterans get 7%, and then it starts going down. 3% to transportation, 2% to education. It's not a lot. 2% to science research. And this is what you're going to find out in federal spending, governmental spending, is that it depends on the president, right? It depends on who's in Congress. It depends on if it's Republican-led, if it's Democrat-led. It depends on what's going on during that time. If we're going to be closer to a war, you're going to see the defense percentage go way up, right? If we're in a national health crisis, you're probably going to see healthcare go up. And then it depends on, what they're wanting to do. We've seen the defense go down and then raise back up. Trump spends a lot more on this than in other areas that other presidents did. So it really just depends on who's in office, who's in Congress, who you put there, and what's going on in the world at that time. So we'll move on. One of the things that money is spent on when it was entitlement programs. So we talk about welfare. You hear it a lot in the news. You hear it a lot around town. So social welfare programs that people are entitled to, quote unquote, if they meet certain requirements. So Congress must fund these programs. So entitlements are very expensive because Congress cannot control how many people receive benefits if you sign up. And that depends, right, on the time of the year. Like right now, these entitlements are very, very high during this pandemic. Normally, they wouldn't be this high. So the example that you have, Social Security, which is #1 spending, right? People that we talked about what Social Security was in the last lesson, Medicare, Medicaid, food stamps, all of that are entitlement programs that people are entitled to, and they're going to receive those benefits. And like it says, you don't know how many people are going to be on, how many people are going to. The goal, right? The goal, if you're in a business, if you're in anywhere, would be to cut down those entitlements and have less people dependent on the government in order to use the taxes in other areas where they need to be, or where they need to be. So federal government's funding, we just talked about where we get the funding from. So federal government funds are divided in two categories. You have mandatory spending. That's the ones that are required by law. That's what I was talking about earlier. Social Security is the largest mandatory expenditure the United States has. Then you have discretionary spending, which has to be authorized each year by Congress, by the people, which we're in a representative government, you know that. So the Congress represents the people. So national defense is our largest discretionary expenditure. So there's not a requirement to fund the military or national defense, but it is the discretionary fund that is the largest one that we spend. So mandatory expenditures, entitlements we've talked about already, Federal Insurance Contribution Acts, which is FICA, that's mandatory. So that's your Social Security, that's your Medicaid, your Medicare, and your unemployment taxes. Social Security, we talked about in the last lesson, federal program to aid older citizens that have retired, or children who have lost their parents, people with disabilities. Those are all Social Security benefits that you get. So Social Security tax is both a federal revenue source and an expenditure, right? Because you pay in Social Security taxes on your income, like we talked about in lesson 2, and then it's expended out, it's spent money by the federal government to those that are in need or that have paid it. And then you have mandatory spending, more mandatory spending, which is Medicare, Medicaid, food stamp programs, veterans benefits. So these include many different things. Medicare is obviously insurance for people who are 65 and older. Medicaid is a joint federal state program for low-income people to receive insurance. Your food stamp program, everybody pretty much knows, but that's about 26 million low-income people that purchase food on food stamps. And then your healthcare coverage and disability payments for veterans, people in the armed forces that have come back. Then you have discretionary income. This is discretionary, obviously means, and we've talked about this in our own personal lives in my class, what your discretionary, it's to your discretion, right? How you want to spend your money. And this is obviously, it has to be voted on by Congress, but so this is your natural resources, your conservation programs, your national park, science, technology, all of those things, justice administration, federal court systems, education, college tuition, public colleges, things like that, your highway, your transportation, the roads, the bridges, all that money, even Amtrak I put on there, train system, right? So all that's discretionary money. They decide how much they're going to give to those areas. And we do all this in a federal budget. They come up with a budget at the beginning of the fiscal year. They work through that budget. And so fiscal year's 12-month period organization plans expenditures. It's not January to December like you think it would be. Fiscal years start at different times. So appropriations are specific amounts of money set aside for specific purposes. So that's what you get. Like if you science and research, they appropriate you that much money. And then Congress votes on the final budget and sends it to the president for approval. He signs it, and then those appropriations go out as needed or as funded as taxes come in to be able to fund those programs. All right, so what happens if we take in more money, taxes, we take in more money than we spend? Well, then we have a surplus, right? We've talked about that in economics. If we take in less money than we spend, we have a deficit. So the goal there for any country and any business and any state, any government, whatever, is to balance the budget. So you spend exactly what you bring in, unless there's a time in which you need to maybe save money, then you have a surplus. So you balance the budget. So when the government collects the same in revenue as it spends, then it's balanced. And that'd be your goal. When the government takes in more revenue than it spends, and you have a surplus, like I said, when the government spends more than it takes in, you would have a deficit. And we've gone through all three of those phases in the United States at many different points, many different years. So if we move on away from federal spending, what about state spending? Because we take state income tax, right? And the state taxes you on certain things, your sales tax. What does that go to? How is your money spent when you pay those sales taxes for Walmart when you buy stuff? Well, the state spends their money on education, which is the largest expenditure in the state of Mississippi, is education. The biggest percentage of money taxes that come in goes to the school, public schools. And then your public safety, which is like your state police and your prisons. And then they spend money on highways and transportation. That's, basically roads, bridges, things like that. Could be train, Amtrak, whatever comes through. Public welfare is another thing. Hospitals, unemployment, those things that you can get your state entitlements for. And then you got arts and recreation. So your parks, your state parks, your museums, your historic sites, all of that get funding from the state. And then, of course, state employees. Like me, I'm a state employee. My mom's a state employee. My dad was a federal employee. So, that's we're getting money from the government. And that's how that part works. If you look at a little breakdown here on this chart, you'll see that Parks and Recreation get a pretty good bit, right? And then it goes down your education, your public welfare, and this is different states, right? This is just an average. In the state of Mississippi, you see this area right here, this purple area, is much, much larger as far as spending goes. We spend a lot more on education than we do much else, really. All right, so what about local spending? You get your local dollars inside of your county. We talked about property taxes. If you own property, then you're paying taxes on that, and that goes straight. Most of that goes to public schools. But you'll see your local spending tax of Eckhart, Mississippi, Pontotoc, Mississippi. Those local governments like that. Where is your tax money spent? So the first, foremost, public schools. After that, it goes to law enforcement, fire protection. You see your local tax dollars go to your volunteer fire departments as well. They get funding from that too. Your local parks and recreation, public health, hospitals, sewers, food inspection, things like that. That's where your money's spent. Public transportation, roads. You see supervisors all the time putting gravel on roads, fixing roads, mowing roads. All of that's part of public transportation. Your social services, like your food stamps, welfare, comes slightly from local spending, and then your records. So, when you're born, you die, you file that, your marriage licenses, all that's local. You go to your local area, fill all those out, and that's your tax money is spent on those employees and those things that they have to buy as well. So that's your local. We've talked about all three, right? Federal expenditures, the way your money is spent. Talked about state. Talked about local, and that's pretty much it. You can go back and watch these videos as much as you want. I'm going to probably do one more video that's going to be on personal finance, at least some rules on personal finance that might help you throughout life. I know most of you are 10th graders, and you're not thinking about a time where you're not going to be living at home with your parents and in the real world, but I'll give you some advice, some things that you can take with you. Personal finances, that's really the last thing that we really missed. If you take my economics class, you'll know we kind of pound through it for the first 9 weeks, and the second 9 weeks is kind of relaxed, and we usually do a large project at the end that takes a couple of weeks to do. So we've pretty much covered everything that I wanted to cover. I'm going to throw in probably one more video on personal finance. I hope that you learned a lot today. I hope that you took what you could learn about taxes that you're going to have to pay in and kind of know now, have a slight example of where that money's going to go. And we'll see you when we see you.